Excited. So this is the last lunch and learn for probably the last, unless I somehow just decide to do something else this week, but probably the last one for this year. Um, and very excited to have Matthew Phillip talking to us. I was recently in St. Louis and my wife and I got to go out with him and his wife, had a great time. So very excited to see what Matt's got to say about psychological safety and remote work. And so since I don't want to take up any of his time, Matt, turned over to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me here on your program. And yeah, it was delightful to see you in person. It's very interesting. It's very topical. We're talking about remote work, which we're working remotely today, and then sometimes we get to work in person and see each other in person. So anyway, so thanks everyone for coming today. Hopefully, I'll go quickly enough that we can have some time to answer questions. Feel free to ask questions throughout. I probably won't be looking at the chat all the time, but Mark can help us, work through those things. So anyway, so welcome. I'm going to start us with a warm up here. Just as a simple thinking exercise, a thought exercise. You don't have to do anything publicly or say anything, but if you just want to think about these questions here. So I'm going to invite you to think about the people in your life with whom you have the most open, kind of vulnerable relationships. Just maybe think about like one or two of those people in your life. How about you think about when was the last time you interacted with them, and how? How was it? A phone call? Was it lunch, dinner? Was it pen pal? Right? I don't know if anyone's ever had a pen pal. Writing letters, sending overseas. And if it's been a while since you've interacted, what were the circumstances of your relationship such that you um, were able to have that level of safety and vulnerability? Maybe you haven't seen each other in a long time. That's kind of the background for what I want to talk about today and how we think about psychological safety in the workplace. Uh, the last time I worked in person full time on site was more than 4 years ago, and which is kind of crazy to think about. Uh, but even before 2020, I had a couple of different work opportunities where I was working in global teams and therefore very kind of remote and hybrid contexts. And then, of course, more recently working in all remote and hybrid. But there's a couple different tales that I'll tell you about and revisit later. The first one was I worked at a company called ThoughtWorks, and these are a couple guys that I worked with in my team. It was a global team. The guy in the middle here is his name was Luca Minudel, and so we would go. He was in London, and I was based here in the States, and we would occasionally get together for in-person work. We would pair on different workshops and opportunities with clients, and then our team would get together at various places in the world. Malcolm, who's on the lower left there, I think that must have been in Germany or Netherlands, somewhere where they have beer steins like that. Anyway, uh, we also got together at various intervals, asynchronously, but we would work together in person a few times a year, and then we would do different individual work in our various places. He was based in London as well. Fast forward, this is a different experience. The company will remain nameless, but this is a remote setting, and I had met a few of these people in person before, but you'll notice in the upper corner, this is a note that I scribbled to myself as a daily reminder based on the advice of a teammate who said, Matt, this is not good. The situation in the team had gotten so toxic that she said, it's probably best if you just don't offer any ideas. So again, that's maybe a different experience for me. So what was the difference in something that was very generative on the one hand with Luca and the guys from ThoughtWorks, and then this situation here where it was a daily reminder. It was so bad that I was forcing myself, restraining myself from really speaking. So anyway, so we'll come back to those in a minute, but I want to just give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So first off, really just level set so everybody has the common understanding of what when I say psychological safety, what I'm referring to, my kind of background. Then I want to talk about like the state of the workplace today. And then I have some research that I did earlier this year in the spring. Perhaps many of you, some of you participated, so thank you. There's still time to participate. It's an ongoing thing, but I want to share some of the research that I did just because it kind of helped me rethink about how it works in a remote and hybrid setting. And then just share some ideas, very pragmatic things. Yeah, Andrew, you get the sticky note. Yeah, I hope you don't have your own, but anyway, just what do we do about this? So anyway, so a quick intro. The way I first came upon psychological safety was reading about Google's Project Aristotle. So they posed the question, what makes our teams effective? What's the secret sauce here? Obviously Google, lots of product teams, data-driven organization. They wanted to get to the bottom. So they over 2 years they interviewed 200 people, employees, looked at hundreds of teams, and they were really confident they'd find the perfect mix of the individual traits and the skills necessary for high performing teams. And what they found was that it was actually very different from what their going in hypothesis was. They learned that there's 5 dynamics that set their best teams apart, but really the idea came across to them was who is on the team matters less than how the team members interact, how they structure their work, and how they view their contributions. And so that was a really kind of key moment, I think, in our workplace understanding about how do teams, what's the secret sauce here? Might this be true for other places? And so you can see that the 5 dynamics here, but the number one thing was something that they ended up referring to as psychological safety. And that's this idea that people are able to take risks, to admit failures. There's equal ability for people in the group to speak up. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. But they found that actually they weren't the only ones in the world interested in this kind of thing. Quite apart from them, there was this amazing researcher, Amy Edmondson, doing research in healthcare environments, and had the hypothesis that teams that had highest levels of psychological safety would have fewer errors in their work and fewer mistakes, and especially catastrophic mistakes when we think about healthcare. What she found was that it changed her hypothesis was invalidated. She found that actually the teams that were most psychologically safe reported the most errors. And so that gave her pause. And what she found when she dug a little deeper was actually they weren't making more errors. They were just reporting the errors and therefore able to fix them and repair and avoid catastrophic problems. And so that, again, contributed to our worldwide understanding of what is psychological safety, why is it important. But even before Amy Edmondson, as great as her work was, our agile pioneer, Alistair Coburn. I don't know if is anybody familiar with his original work, Crystal Clear? He'd mentioned in his book, or his compendium of ways of working called Crystal Clear, which he first published on the web in 1998. Property number 4 of Crystal Clear. Okay, yeah, we got at least one a fan of Alistair's early work. But property number 4 in his Crystal Clear methods was personal safety. And so again, being able to speak when something's bothering you without fear of reprisal. That's the common kind of thread here when we think about different definitions of safety. And of course, even going back farther, I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember Deming. I'm old, I'm not that old. But Deming was on about this, and was a purveyor of this idea of management, especially leaders, driving out fear so that everyone may work effectively. And he talked about how fear invites wrong figures and bears of bad news fare badly. And to really keep your job, you have to only present to the boss only good news. And so there's another person who's kind of said it this way in an organization: how fast does bad news reach the top? I think that's an interesting way to look at the health of an organization in terms of, through a psychological safety lens. Right. In more modern times, DevOps, the DevOps report has really talked about the importance of how safety is an important culture component that leads to high performance engineering teams. And so again, this is well known. This is where we are today. Hopefully, most of you have come across safety, but the importance of it as relates to performance and kind of a bottom line thing. It's not just good on its own, but it's really the underpinning or the kind of a leading indicator for high performing teams. And so, as with any good quad chart, you always want to be on the upper right. And so, some of the things we think about when we have a interaction of high safety and high performance standards. I've been in organizations that were kind of in that comfort zone. High safety, you could say do whatever you want, but it's at the end of the day, no one was really that concerned about performance. And I've also been in the anxiety zone where there were high performance standards, but very low safety, which you can, again, you may have experienced yourself. But when we're in the learning zone, which is the high levels of both of those things, research has shown that people are more engaged. So employee engagement is obviously a big deal. Obviously, productivity is important, and then stress, anxiety issues. So it's all good stuff to be in that learning zone. In terms of projects and products, I think we're mostly familiar with the idea of the watermelon report. Everything's green on the outside. On the inside, it's red. So again, the importance of being able to share the bad news early and adapt, and as Alistair said, repair. I think we've seen it obviously in the news writ large. I don't know if anyone's here from Boeing. You may have your own personal stories, but again, what happens when things are not safe? We don't want to get to that level. Right. So that brings us to today's situation and the question of remote work. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it something in between? And so is that the question? Should we change the lever one way or the other? Just a kind of a history. This is a kind of cherry picked moments in time. Obviously, people have been working remotely since the dawn of time, but more recently, we had IBM did a work from home experiment back in the late 70s, and then kind of adjusted that and added to their numbers. Call centers became a thing. J.C. Penney kind of led the way with that. And then telecommuting is kind of in response to fuel issues and people wanting to not spend so much time in their cars and save money on gas when there was a fuel crisis, all these things. Then we had networking, co-spaces, co-working spaces, and maybe some of you worked in co-working spaces. That became a thing. And as technology further enabled us to work remotely and work from anywhere, more and more American workers, and people all over the world, of course, too, but people working at least part of the time. We now had a connection that was, we didn't have to do a dial-up modem, if you remember those days. Our connection speeds, our video connectivity was increased, things like Zoom or insert your own favorite technology. And of course, in spring of 2020, we had various responses to COVID resulted in people being locked down, forced to not come into work in many cases. And so there was a massive shift, of course, to working remotely. And that brings us to today, which I'm calling the clash. So are we forced to return? Are you having the badge swiping thing? So someone told me it's like a coffee swipe, or what, I don't know what the word is, where you just go to the office to get a coffee and you swipe out and you get credit for coming to the office. Are you able to stay remote? Whatever. But the Clash, of course, for those of you old enough to remember this great album, Should I Stay or Should I Go to the Office? I think that's where we're living in today, the clash of viewpoints on this. So it's weird because there's lots of different research that shows us, things are good. Yeah. Okay, there you go. The coffee swipe rule. Yeah. Okay, good. It's a thing. Experiences may vary. So this is obviously before 2020. So people who are working remotely reported that their situation maybe wasn't as good. Colleagues say things behind my back. That was more likely to occur with remote situations. People lobby against me. Some weird behaviors. More recently, this is Obviously, a new government employee here, but it's a particularly sinister picture of Elon. I don't know. I guess you could imagine what Forbes's point of view is, but anyway, of course, he was in the news even before the election because he was talking about having everyone come back to working in the office and calling it even morally wrong to have remote situations. Interesting. Okay, all right. I don't know. I'm not going to ask you how you feel one way or the other, but just to know there's differing viewpoints there. And then work-life balance issues were affected. Uh, None other than Louis Gerstner. He talked about like you won't be able to be an effective leader if you don't work in person. Interesting. But some people say you're happier if you get to work from home. I think I am some days. I mean, all right, we have some Elon fans in the audience. Good, good, good. All right. Hopefully we won't talk about politics today. But maybe some of you are happier working from home. I know it's nice to have flexibility. Um, Again, there's trade-offs. So in some ways, it's easier to balance things, but we feel less connected to our coworkers. I know that's true for me. And then, of course, the loneliness epidemic continues, and so we still feel lonely, uh, maybe because we're working remotely, or it's maybe enhanced by that. So, anyway, um, you might say our relationship with remote work today is it's complicated. Right? That's our status, and so the question is, for me, not so much. Do we work from home? Do we work remotely? Not do we force people to work somewhere? But really helping everyone wherever they are, unless you have organizational clout to make that policy decision. The goal here is to really help us understand what do we need to be aware of, and how do we help people to do their best wherever they are. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my research, and then we'll get into some more practical things. By the way, I mentioned you can still participate. It's a simple 10-question survey, anonymous, by the way, to preserve your own safety and allow you to report honest figures. Okay, so the question, of course, does it matter where you work? My going in hypothesis was that yes, people, the more you worked in person, the higher level of psychological safety you would have. That was what I thought. So I tried to be as unbiased as I could in my survey. And so, of course, the answer was it depends. So like any good consultant, I'll tell you what it depends on. So here's the survey. Here's what it looked like. I used Dr. Edmondson's safety driver statements. I thought, obviously she's the leader with this stuff. They worked well enough. They were easily applicable in any context. So those questions are, mistakes are held against me. And again, on a Likert scale, how strongly do you feel about these things? People reject others for being different. It's difficult to ask others for help. I'm able to bring up problems. It's safe to take a risk. No one would deliberately act to undermine me. My unique skills are valued. All that went into what I just referred to as total safety, total psychological safety. Okay, so some of the variables I looked at then was how do things like your time in your context, time in your team, how long have you been in a team? Have you met a teammate in person ever? I wanted to know that. Have you met your manager in person? Does that matter? Maybe. Number of days working from home. So again, my going in hypothesis was, yes, the number of days working from home would correlate positively to increased psychological safety. Your type of context. So I'm using the word context here to refer to the environment that you're working in. You might say team, but I have a particular definition of team. Not everybody's working in a team. And so that was, does that matter? Does your type of context matter? Other things, last time you were on camera, last time you interacted in person, etc. So here's, in addition to working in person at least sometimes, I'll get to that in a minute. These are the things that most strongly correlated to safety. Now, I just want to disclaim this. I'm not a scientific researcher. This is not fit for academic publication. It might be the precursor to something like that, but this is my methods were fast and loose. Maybe is too much, but anyway, they're not scientific. But I believe that they're good enough to share with you today. in general, then, the things that, in addition to some in-person work, the things that correlated strongest were your type of context and the size of your context, right? So um, we'll talk about that a little bit more. So in particular, some of the individual variables then. So this is what I was getting at when I said some in-person interaction. So you see the highest levels of safety that were reported in the survey were people who were actually working in person at least some of the time. So the people who never worked in person had the lowest levels of psychological safety. So there was a correlation there. But in general, if you were at least in the last week, the last month, those kinds of interactions were the most helpful. There wasn't a whole lot of difference in terms of how many days. I did want to know about camera usage, just to say, does this matter? It seemingly didn't. Now, I think that there's other things going on here. Obviously, the effect of the team size, the team or the context, and then, of course, whether you'd been in person recently. This is an interesting finding, the effect of email communication. So a lot of times when we're working remotely, we tend to rely on email as a way of communicating. It seemed like there was a sweet spot of email communication in terms of how it reflected safety. So not overly relying on email is probably a good conclusion here. But the idea is that we don't want to replace email. We don't want to replace in-person interactions and live interactions with email. It's kind of the takeaway for me. Now here's the bit that was really interesting, is the effect of context type. So leaders and managers, many of whom are either in their own leadership groups or kind of looking after multiple teams, they actually reported the highest level of safety. But after that, the people who were working in a team scenario, so basically the survey definitions was I work in a matrix group of people. So that would be the matrix thing there, where you're working on multiple projects with different people. Not everybody is 100% allocated to a particular effort. The team is really, I defined it as working in a bounded and interdependent group of people who work together to achieve a common goal. And that was my definition for team. And then different people working in functional departments, providing a service, and then of course leaders. The other bit was context size. So going back to Google's research, they did note actually in the kind of the footnotes that size of the team did matter, even though it didn't significantly impact their team effectiveness. They did cite a lot of research that shows that that research identifying smaller teams, like fewer than 10 people, is more beneficial. Small teams experience better work-life quality, work outcomes, less conflict, stronger cohesion, etc. Just going back to here, some of the reasons why matrix teams experience less safety. Mark Mortensen has done some research on this kind of stuff, and he found that the teams discover that the constant entrance and exit of members weakens group cohesion and identity, which makes it hard to build trust and resolve issues. So there's something to that in terms of the context type. So when we put a couple of these variables together, we see that there's a really powerful connection between team context and working in person, at least once a week.
Hey, Matt, quick question. Somebody was asking what the sample size is.
Yeah. I think I have for the survey. You mean I think we've had more than 150 participants over the last year. So again, probably not scientific, but I do have a level of confidence that it's reflecting something of what's the case. Again, it's a global audience, different industries. So my big takeaway from that research was that small size of your context, team structure as your context, and then some in-person work is what leads to our highest levels of safety. So if we do have some kind of way to to do the, change things, move some levers around, this is what we want to be aiming for. At least that's what the research seemed to indicate. And it squares with other research. So here's some research that was done at a Norwegian bank. Basically, you can see they looked at some of the behaviors that are associated with safety, and theirs is a bit more stronger correlated with on-site work. But again, there's also some mixture there too. I don't know if anyone's read the culture code, but again, they talk about like why might this be the case, kind of underlying what's going on with our in-person interactions. And it's the idea that safety is cultivated through disposition and body language, and really the idea of frequent eye contact, conversations, and even just like how our physically showing up with people. Has anyone ever done this? Does anyone know what this is? Anyone want to guess? You're probably actually trying to take the test, aren't you? I was like, well, this is gonna check people out. Okay, well, this is the reading the mind and the eyes test. So it's given for different psychological functions, but it's one of the easiest ways to gauge social sensitivity. Basically, you picture people's eyes. There's some research done in 2008 that, again, looking at team behaviors, very similar findings to what Google did in Project Aristotle. Basically, there were two behaviors that all the good teams shared. And these are not like technical teams. These are people like doing small tasks, grocery shopping, these kind of things. The first one was equality in the distribution of conversational turn taking. So almost the very definition of what Google found for psychological safety. And the second thing was that all the good teams had high social sensitivity, which is basically this kind of fancy way of saying that they were skilled at intuiting how I felt based on their tone of voice, their expressions, and other nonverbal cues. So, so almost being able to sense when someone's feeling upset or left out, right? And so again, this is an important variable, whether we're working in person or not, to be aware of and think about what are the things we have to compensate for in terms of the interactions. Okay, so the next few minutes, I just want to share a few pragmatic ideas, thoughts, considerations. What might we do about this? So I've thought about these and presented them in the kind of rubric of the four domains of psychological safety. So attitude toward risk and failure, willingness to help, open conversation, and then this idea, I call it culture add and fit. Some people call it inclusivity and diversity, but really culture add and culture fit is how I think about this topic. So helping people start well. This has been true, I think, for me anecdotally, but also I think some of the research bears this out too. If you have a chance to have people start well in person, it's a great opportunity to do that. I know a lot of companies have cut their travel budgets, etc. People are working all over the world, but if you have an opportunity to help people start well, again, going back to my experiences, the tale of two context that I had earlier. In the one case, I was working remotely and hybrid, but they had everybody come to the office in Chicago and get started together. They had things like, provide your favorite songs, and in between our sessions, they'd play various of our favorite songs, right? Medallia has actually done some really cool things with this, where their onboarding program ends with each new hire reading a paragraph that was written by his or her hiring manager, describing the special spark, why we hired the person, right? And so these are really important milestones and indicators that allow us to start well, and we can use for long periods of time. So again, maybe you have that pen pal or someone you've met, a best friend, you haven't seen the person in a year, but you've had these kind of touchstone experiences and onboarding, and helping people start well is an important way to do that. Meaningful check-ins. I don't know how meaningful Jerry Seinfeld and Kramer's conversations were, but they had frequent check-ins, that's for sure. And so it's really interesting that there's one meaningful conversation a week develops high performance relationships more than any other single leadership activity. Um, Interestingly, a really low percentage of employees have formal or even informal conversations with their manager um, about their careers, right? Just talking about what do you want to be doing? What's interesting to you? And especially younger workers would love to have these kind of conversations with their managers. So one of the things, and just kind of hygiene wise, when I'm online with someone, I actually try to free up my hands and kind of show them above the screen here, so that you can see that I'm not. I'm guessing you all are intuitive enough to know what I'm doing when I'm doing this. Oh yeah, Mark. Yeah, tell me more about that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Right. I'm on my phone. Right. So, like, I don't want to be multitasking or attempting to multitask. I'm hopefully going to just keep my hands here so Mark and the rest of you can see that I'm not trying to trick you. I'm not trying to multitask on you. Right. Even just those kind of things can help people feel, oh, Matt's actually listening to me. I matter here. Right. Whether like, if you're in person, hopefully you're not on your phone during the conversation if you're talking to someone over coffee. Same thing is true when we're working remotely. Uh, this is a situation where I noticed that a lot of the people who'd been hired hadn't met and hadn't really had those kind of hallway conversations, or even just like, you know, for those of you who've worked in a shared war room or Obeya or team space, where you can just go around and you can kind of hear how people are talking and enter in the conversation and learn almost osmotically. I realized that we're having a lot of tensions boil over into meetings because all we ever had was meetings. There was never any kind of in between time. And so we're having some disagreements about understanding each other in the meetings, when in planning meetings, where it was probably not the appropriate time, or it would take extra time to figure out where are you coming from, Mark, or where are you coming from, Matt. And so I ended up scheduling these let's talk about sessions. So basically, they were informal, they were not required, but it's basically, as you can see, it was a venue safe from the stresses of meetings and decision making. And so in those forums, we were able to have kind of like a lower temperature, low key, like kind of how do you come at this? What's estimation to you, Mark? What do you mean by forecasting? What are these things? What's a story to you? What is a user story? Um, and these were able kind of took it out of the game time. Some people talk about this as slowification, where you kind of you work on things outside of the main work stream. And so this was actually a helpful practice for us because none of us had really been in each other's space before. Speaking of that, again, for those of you who come from an environment where you're working side by side, this is I had the orange star for some reason. I don't know if this is like someone needed to watch me or I was doing something well, but anyway, I'm pairing here. But we if you're online, you're not able to pair like this so much, and so I call it working aloud, where we're just doubling down on saying what we're doing. I'm going to be doing this. It works well with intent-based leadership practices, actually, where you say, I'm going to do this. And Amy Edmondson, in some of her more recent work, talks about how we have to be more deliberately and more proactively open to being able to share our ideas. And she says, work a little harder to share what we're thinking. So much of what we think is that, oh, Mark understands what I'm doing. He's going to give me the benefit of the doubt. We don't have those kind of relationships anymore because we haven't been working in person so much. And so we have to be a little more intentional about working openly. And for those of you who do have safety, or maybe you're in leadership roles, just to really affirm when people are vulnerable and affirm when people are acting courageously. This is an example of a colleague from a while back. She actually had the courage to say these things in an email to the team. I really have a long way to go. And then she, later said, and this situation makes me very sad. Those are statements of real vulnerability and openness, which was not easy for her. And even saying, I'm being completely open and honest, wearing my heart on my sleeve. And so this is a moment where you might say, "Oh, way to go! That's great." And it maybe even in your own mind and your own heart, you're like, "I really appreciate you." But it's important to go to the next step and actually publicly affirm that. And so this is what I did. I just wrote again to this person, but also the whole team, just to kind of help normalize these types of behaviors and really saying, thanks for having the courage to do this with us. You're raising important questions. It's probably true for many of us that we have these same things. And so, I paraphrase Deming to say, where there's honesty like this, there's the possibility of improving. And so, again, where you see these things, don't just passively nod your head and appreciate that, but actually go to the next level. Again, this is kind of working aloud or saying things explicitly. Um, One thing I've been doing lately is experimenting with not going to meetings where there's more than 8 people involved. It's going quite well for me, actually. Maybe like next year, Mark, we can talk about that. But I recommend this, whether in person or not. But uh, when you have too many people, there's bystander effect, diffusion of responsibility, whatever kind of social thing you want to, a free rider behavior. Just opt out. You might say explicitly, like, say, hey, listen, it looks like you guys have enough people to cover this. I'm not that important. Whatever it is, that might take some courage on your own. But after 8, don't collaborate. Again, team agreements. Has maybe added value now because, again, we're so much of what we think about how I work and how you might work, they're assumptions. And so if you're familiar with the Johari window, right? There's things that we think of, people know about ourselves, and things that we assume, and things that we don't want people to know about ourselves. And so making explicit some of these thoughts and it provides much greater clarity on how we want to be working. I've seen increased use of personal operating model manuals, API of me, whatever you want to call it. Basically, just saying, "Hey, this is how I work." One of my colleagues from a couple places ago, the first day she turned up to work, I was her manager. I had a manager relationship. She gave me this thing, and it's like the guide to managing me. It's like, what is this? And it turned out to be one of the greatest gifts ever because it was like an open book test, right? It said, this is what I need. This is how I work. And again, in the absence of actually working side by side in person with people, those are the kind of that's the kind of information we don't get. Right? I don't know if any of you have joined an organization the last few years. There are a couple of experiences I've had. You might even get hired, not even having ever been in the company's offices. There's so much lost information that we have by not being in the space with people. Like, are people talking in this office? Is it like library quiet? So we need to compensate for those things, and having these kind of explicit operating manuals is one of those ways we can do that. Again, some of the tried and true things that you may have experienced doing team building, making space for people to be known. So on the left here, you see a marketplace of skills poster. You can do this remotely as well as in person. It is a good thing to do in person because, again, the more you can do these things in person, whether it's like a quarterly meeting together, a monthly meeting, whatever, there's so much richness when people share. But one of the things I like about these activities, this is kind of my own version on the right here, that the make people awesome. So this is from Josh Kiriowski's Modern Agile tenets. But the idea is that people can share on their own terms. They can go as deep as they want to. And doing so in person is actually facilitates that kind of interaction and that kind of safety where people can be empathetic. The nice thing about safety is we can measure it now. So there's no need to guess. This comes from Andy Edmondson's site, Fearless Organization, Personal Safety Scan. But I actually keep my own personal safety every month. I have a recurring Kanban card. It's like do your safety check. But you can also do safety checks in the context of retrospectives. I've been taught some leaders to do this, and they replicate it. They're like, oh, I can just do this. It doesn't have to be a retrospective. Basically, a lot of leaders are well-intentioned. They say, oh, this is a safe place. You can share anything. But that's not for the leader to declare. It's really for the people to say whether they're safe or not. And of course, this is all predicated on anonymity. If you say, who doesn't feel safe here, raise your hand, it kind of defeats the purpose. Working together is a really important thing. I think one of the things we've lost in all remote environments is that we typically just have meetings to talk about stuff. Sometimes a decision gets made, but it's just meeting after meeting. What we've lost is this idea of working together. So I would encourage people to try working concurrently. whether it's ensemble work, more than a couple people, just pairing with people, but actually spending a portion of your day working alongside someone remotely. Uh, it, I've looked at my calendar and encourage other people to look at their calendars. What percentage of your week are you spending in meetings? If it's more than 50%, you're probably not being a very effective worker, and you're probably not gaining a lot of psychological safety. This is actually a picture from a group from my church, a leadership group. We did a little retreat in person. There were some particular issues that were difficult for us to work together through. And we got to that point where some people call it collaborative friction, where it was clear there was some disagreement and even some intense emotions. But we worked through that. And I think that's one of the things that makes it's difficult when we're working remotely is to kind of just when those intense moments of collaborative friction occur, to kind of fade back and kind of retreat into the safety of our turning our camera off or just leaving the meeting, and we can just be at home and not have to be bothered with this. Move forward with that and actually embrace that collaborative friction, because that's what's actually going to help you go deeper as a team. This particular leadership group, we actually met later and we actually worked through that, and it made us a stronger leadership group. But it was a moment where we had to actually kind of cognitively embrace and intentionally say we're gonna work through this together rather than retreat from it. Resolving cognitive dissonance. This is an interesting thing that I've seen. Maybe you see it on the posters on your office walls or in the value statements. This is great. This is Bank of America Institute. They published this thing earlier this year. They're on the psychological safety bandwagon. Yes, psychological safety should be a priority. Way to go. And then you look at their job ads and you see, well, there's a job that they need where they are requiring flawless execution, right? So you just say what's going on here? Like this we have two very different things. What's really the culture here? Anyway, so just looking at some of those things, they're kind of unforced errors, or they kind of expose beliefs that maybe people want to have. They want to claim the psychological safety mantle, but really they're working from like a theory X type of management approach as opposed to theory Y. I don't know if you've seen this situation. This is the new office environment, right? So you go to the office and everyone's on calls throughout the day. They can't be bothered because they have to go either from their cube or they go into one of these little portals that they magically are whisked away, and working remotely. So why are we working in the office again? This is a funny moment. This is a guy I worked with, Giannis. We were both in the office one day, and then we had no idea when we could actually have coffee, and so we both take a call at the same time. We're talking to different people, and his little booth is right next to mine, and I'm like, "Hi, Giannis. I guess we'll meet some other day." This is kind of the ludicrousness of these kind of forced return to the office, where all we're doing is replicating the type of behavior that we do remotely, where we're on calls with people remotely. So I would advocate for making better use of in-person time, right? So the type of high energy, high creativity, high collaborative type of work. If you're familiar with the idea of the flipped classroom from educational circles, I think it's a pattern that we can actually emulate in our workplaces. So the traditional classroom, of course, where you come in person, you listen to the lecture, you go home and do your homework. That's of course flipped in this model, where you do kind of the lectures and the kind of watch videos and things on your own time, and then when you're in person, you're actually doing homework together. You're working with and getting feedback on what's going on. And so I propose the model is applicable for work, right? So if you can think about your schedule, divide off your work to say, what's the thing I need to have, like maybe high level of focus or kind of be alone time, solo work, meetings where I don't need to be in person. But then when you actually go to the office, mark out time to do collaborative work and high human work, if you will. Right. So I think that organizational design has kind of suffered. And so we need to kind of update our organizational design model for what's going on here. So we've got all these teams now that are distributed, teams that are people all over the world. And so it's hard to put Humpty back together again. So if you think about what's happened, pre-2020, most people were working in a central in-person location, worked mostly. I remember the days of the energized team space, team rooms, uh, great opportunity for collaboration. And then, of course, 2020, 2021, everybody's working anywhere. Okay, so that's how our teams are comprised. It may have worked in some settings. I'll give it a little check mark. And then, of course, our era now. Now we have people who go into the office, some people who are working remotely, but they're all on the teams together. And so I would propose, that's this Humpty Dumpty broken model where people go to the office and they sit in their cubes or they sit in these little pod booths, whatever, phone booths. I would say for the next year and coming to rethink about how our teams are organized and structured. So we might have a few central in-person teams, but then we also have all remote teams. Just because we're having this kind of weird mixture that's maybe not working quite so well. And then considering how we communicate. So, this is the Allen curve. You've probably seen this. This is a guy I worked with. His name's Leo. I'd worked with him for more than a year before I actually met him in person. He worked in Greece, and when I met him in person, he's like, Matt, like it's so nice to meet you. Partly because I actually thought you were a jerk, like online, your online persona. I didn't know you, and sometimes you come off and you're kind of a jerk. But now that we've met in person, you're like a very interesting, lovely guy. And I was really shocked, because again, it goes back to the Johari window thing. We think that people see us in a different way, and so just knowing how we communicate, if we have a different online persona, or just making assumptions about how people think, you, I thought Leo knew me. I thought he knew that I wasn't, evil intent, and it was a very different experience for him. So knowing how we communicate. This is actually Mark helped teach a class that I teach at the local university. He was a guest instructor, which was great for everybody. But the very first class we had, I brought in these juggling balls, and most people don't know how to juggle. And it was great because we intentionally failed together. That was the whole goal of this is setting up the semester that we would be able to learn from our mistakes and be able to admit failure openly. And so you can see everybody's having a good time trying to juggle, failing to juggle, including me, by the way. I was head of the class in my failure. So demonstrating that. Those of you who are leaders, demonstrate and admit. Amy Edmondson talks about one of the leaders she interviews as bragging about being a not knower. So it's a great leadership example, leadership behavior. Making time for unstructured and play time is really important. Does anybody know what this is? This game, online game? Mark knows. Mark's playing it right now, probably. Yeah, this is GeoGuessr. It's a group I worked with. We would like once a week, sometimes twice a week. Before or after stand up, we would again all remote team. We would just spend 5 minutes playing GeoGuessr. It's a great way just to kind of unwind and again, our meetings are typically structured so that they're very transactional. And this was a way to kind of break out of that mold and think about, let's just have some fun together. And you get to know each other too, right? In this game, it drops you into some place in the world randomly, and you have to figure out where you are. And so it's great because you get to see different people's experiences with travel, cultures, and backgrounds. And of course, fika, the Swedish break time. You can do this remotely. It's actually a nice thing. I mentioned our meetings are mostly transactional. Having time to just do something other than work. So the rules for me for fika, of course, I always have some kind of little bit of food to eat, cake or something, and then you can talk about anything except for work. This is difficult, actually. Some people, it freaks them out. They're like, I don't know how to talk about something other than work. We're on a work call, but try it. Anyway, engineering, if you're a fan of Josh Kiriowski, I mentioned earlier, he has this concept of engineering, which is a portmanteau a word that means safety engineering, right? From the Japanese, anzen. But basically, I've put this together, and you can read this offline if you want to. But if you're interested in taking this seriously, this is kind of my pledge to myself, to my colleagues, to people if I'm in a leadership or a managerial role. I will not do these things, right? And so just being aware of your own self, but also these are things I will do. So proactively doing these things. I mentioned a couple of those things earlier. Um, but it has to do with your self-awareness as a leader and not creating unsafe places, doing what you can to create safety, using safety checks to be aware, am I the problem here? Not just declaring safety, etc. So I invite you to take the engineer's pledge with me. All right, wrapping up, just to kind of revisit my context from earlier, the tale of two contexts. So this is a more recent photo. I think well, everybody except for Luca has lost some hair and grayed a little bit. Anyway, but Malcolm and Luca and me, this is in London. We still keep in touch, and even now, Luca and I have paired on some conference talks and workshops that we still do. So he's working in a different company, I'm working in a different company. But the relationships that we forged, partly by working in person and doing all those things that I kind of mentioned previously, paying attention to the relationship, paying attention to the size of our team, the context of our team. How do we work together? How do we make sure we're known to each other? Even if we're only working in person 2 or 3 times a year, how do we make the most of those in-person interactions? All those things have led to a real generative relationship I've had with these guys and several of the others on the team too. So many years later, we still have a high level of safety, a high level of productivity, even though we're working in very different things. So anyway, so I just wanted to share that and kind of share the hopefulness of how it can be to work remotely or in a hybrid context and still have a high degree of safety. My next move for this is actually using sense making techniques to understand more deeply how psychological safety works in a remote and hybrid workplace. So if you're interested in joining me on this, please let me know. But that's what's happening next. So I think, Mark, I think maybe it has time for questions, but I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, that's awesome. I'm going to go just to let everybody know. I'm going to stop the streaming. So if you've got any questions to increase psychological safety, if you want to ask questions, so this won't be archived as soon as I figure out how to stop.